Hey there, settle in, maybe fluff that pillow or flick on a fan for that gentle hum. Let's dive into the wild, wacky and sometimes downright hazardous world of medieval beauty standards. Picture a time when looking healthy wasn't the goal. Nope, the aim was to resemble someone who'd just been politely exercised, pale, delicate and about as sun-kissed as a cave-dwelling hermit. Before we get rolling, if you're vibing with this, give a quick like, subscribe. If you're feeling fancy, and drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always a kick to see who's joining us from across the globe. Now dim those lights, get cosy, and let's step back to a world where beauty was a high-stakes game. In medieval Europe, pale skin wasn't just a look, it was a flex. A billboard screaming, "I'm too rich to toil under the sun, thank you very much." Forget today's glowy tanned ideal of beach vacations and green smoothies. Back then, a tan meant you were out in the fields, probably wrestling a plough or milking a cow, which was the 14th century equivalent of a social death sentence. Pale skin, on the other hand, whispered wealth, nobility, and a life spent sipping watered-down wine in a draughty castle. But we're not talking a soft, dewy glow here. Oh no. The ideal was skin so translucent it looked like you'd just seen a ghost, or maybe you were one. Think veins faintly visible like a map of delicate rivers under porcelain. It was the kind of pallor that made people wonder if you'd ever met sunlight, or if you just hissed at it from behind a tapestry. Now, nature doesn't always play along with such lofty goals. Some folks had the audacity to be born with actual blood flow, giving their cheeks a rude rosy flush. So the nobility took matters into their own hands, or rather their faces. Enter white lead powder, the medieval equivalent of foundation, except it came with a side of slow poisoning. You dab this stuff on and voila, instant corpse-chic glow. Your skin looked flawless, like a freshly whitewashed wall, but over time it might blister flake or just give up entirely. And that was the good news. The bad news, chronic fatigue, hair loss, and a one-way ticket to an early grave. Beauty, as it turns out, had a body count. Some folks skipped the lead and went for vinegar-soaked cloths to bleach their skin, which stung like a swarm of bees, but at least didn't kill you as fast. Others slathered on crushed pearls mixed with egg whites, leaving their faces shiny and slightly omelette-scented. Want to really lean into the aesthetic, paint blue veins on your arms with pigment to fake that fragile, noble look, like your skin might split open if you sneezed too hard. This obsession wasn't just vanity, it was a class war fought with makeup brushes. Pale skin screamed, "I don't work, I don't sweat, I'm better than you." Romantic poems from the time swooned over women white as snow, or pale as winter's moon, which is a poetic way of saying she looked like she might faint at any moment. It was a status symbol, a way to say you were above the grubby reality of agriculture. But here's the kicker, achieving that look meant waging a slow, decorative war on your own body. You weren't just applying makeup, you were committing to a lifestyle of dodging sunlight, dodging labour and dodging common sense. The good news, you looked divine. The bad news, so did the fleas, and they were thriving. Let's keep this journey going. Next up, we'll see how far people went to make their foreheads a fashion statement. Now that you're picturing those ghostly pale faces, let's just zoom in on another medieval beauty. Must have the forehead so vast it could double as a jousting field. In the Middle Ages, a high, smooth forehead wasn't just trendy, it was the crown jewel of elegance, a sign you spent your days sighing poetically out of castle windows, not shoveling manure. This wasn't about a cute little brow lift. Oh no, this was a full-on forehead expansion project, and it came with some eyebrow-raising commitment. Settle back, maybe adjust that blanket, and let's explore this itchy, bizarre obsession. A tall forehead was the medieval face's architectural marvel, screaming intelligence, divinity, and absolutely zero manual labour. To pull it off, women didn't just pluck a few stray hairs, they went to war on their brows. Eyebrows were seen as facial clutter, stubborn weeds ruining the pristine garden of your face. So out they came, plucked to oblivion with tweezers, or shaved off entirely for that serene, slightly alien look. Some even pushed the hairline back, yanking out scalp hair inch by painful inch to make their foreheads look like they could host a small tournament. Medieval grooming manuals were wild. Imagine recipes for depilatory creams made from quicklime vinegar-soaked leeches or cat dung. You'd slather that on, pray it didn't burn your skin off, and hope your forehead now looked like a sundial. The result? A face that started somewhere near the crown of your head, framed by nothing but smooth alabaster skin. This wasn't a solo act. Fashion backed it up. Tight hoods, wimples, and those iconic cone-shaped hennins. Think fairy tale princess hats pulled the hairline up or hid where your brows used to live. Portraits from the time show women with foreheads so expansive you'd swear they were plotting world domination up there. And it wasn't just nobles in England, France, Italy, everywhere got in on this. Poets praised women whose faces seemed to float above their shoulders, unburdened by pesky hair. But not everyone had the time or tweezers for this level of dedication, so some clever folks faked it drawing their foreheads higher with makeup, or draping headbands and veils to cover the evidence. Medieval contouring baby, just with more fabric and fewer YouTube tutorials. Here's the rub. This look wasn't just about beauty, it was about looking curated like an angel who'd wandered out of a church fresco. Angels in medieval art rarely had brows after all, and that wasn't a coincidence. A bare forehead said you were refined, pure, and probably not out herding goats. But let's be real, plucking your brows into non-existence while dodging skin infections and judgmental priests, that's next level grit. These women weren't just chasing fashion, they were surviving it one painful pluck at a time. Next we'll dive into how they added a touch of colour and turned their hair into a divine curtain. Stay tuned. Alright, you're nestled in maybe with that fan humming like a distant medieval market, so let's keep wandering through the quirky world of medieval beauty. You've got the pale skin and sky-high foreheads down, but now it's time to add a pinch of colour and some heavenly hair to the mix. In the Middle Ages, a subtle blush and cascading locks weren't just nice-to-haves, they were your ticket to looking like you belonged in a tapestry, not a turnip field. Picture yourself in a drafty castle, dodging drafts and nosy priests as we dive into how medieval folks turned their cheeks rosy and their hair into a divine flex. First up, blush. A gentle flush on your cheeks was the goal, like you'd just heard a spicy troubadour ballad, or stepped outside for a heartbeat, but not long enough to heaven forbid tan. This wasn't about looking like you'd run a marathon, it was about hinting at youth fertility and the fact you might survive past 28. But here's the catch, you couldn't look like you were trying. Vanity was a sin, and the church had zero chill about women smearing colour on their faces. Too much rouge and you risked being called out as a harlot, or worse, suspiciously French. So women got creative. They'd dab on beetroot juice, crushed strawberries or mulberries nature's makeup aisle. For the fancy crowd, there was cochineal, a red pigment made from crushed bugs. Yep, insects. Beauty's never been kind. Some just pinched their cheeks raw for that natural glow, while others used red ochre or wine sediment applied with a cloth, or fingers praying their maid wouldn't snitch to the clergy. The wealthy, they might risk red lead or cinnabar, which gave a perfect pink but could send you to an early grave. You'd apply it carefully, no mirrors handy, just muscle memory and hope. If someone noticed your glow, you'd mutter something about the wind and change the subject like a pro. Now hair o'hair was where you could shine, literally. Blonde was the gold standard linked to youth virtue, and the Virgin Mary, who despite her Middle Eastern roots, was painted as a blonde in every church. If you were naturally blonde, congrats, you were basically blessed. But blondes fade, especially under medieval grime, so women whipped up concoctions of saffron chamomile ash, honey, and sometimes urine whose nobody asked to lighten their locks. You'd slather it on, sit in the sun like a human solar panel and pray for that angelic shimmer. The ideal was long, wavy hair cascading like a curtain of holy light, but only if you were unmarried. Once you said, I do, your hair was banished under veils, wimples and nets like it was a national security threat. Married women wrapped their locks tighter than a monastery's budget, with coifs and starched veils that made you look like a pious burrito. Unmarried girls, though, they let their hair flow, maybe with a gentle braid, signalling purity and availability, unless you were going for that saintly forest maiden vibe, which was only cool if you were actually being martyred. Noble women braided or twisted their hair into elaborate styles, studded with silk ribbons or beads, just to remind everyone they didn't shear sheep for a living. Hair wasn't just beauty. It was a social code, a way to say I'm marriage material, or I'm off the market, but still fabulous. Next we'll climb higher literally with those towering hats and the body shape that screamed nobility. You're still with me cosy in your modern nest, far from the medieval hustle, where beauty was a full-time job. We've covered ghostly skin-epic foreheads, and hair that could make angels jealous. But now let's talk about topping it all off, literally with hats that scraped the sky, and a body shape that said, I'm too delicate to lift a spoon. In the 15th century courts of Europe, towering headgear and a willowy figure were your VIP pass to nobility. So grab that blanket, maybe imagine a flickering candle, and let's step into a world where taller meant nobler, and frailty was the ultimate flex. Let's start with the hennin. the cone-shaped hat that looked like it was designed by someone who loved church steeples a bit too much. These weren't just accessories, they were social ladders you wore on your head. Picture a silk or velvet cone, sometimes 2 feet tall, with a sheer veil trailing from the tip like a comet's tail. The taller the hennin, the higher your status and the more door frames you'd clip on your way to dinner. French and Burgundian elites were the trendsetters, but soon everyone was stacking their heads skyward. Getting your hair into one of these was a mission. You'd braid it, stuff it into the cone, or shave your forehead, yet back to that real estate to make the hat sit right. Comfort. Not a chance. These things were wired for shape heavy as a bad decision and a fire hazard around candles, but they screamed, "I'm rich enough to balance this nonsense all day." Not into cones. Some women rocked heart-shaped escoffions like croissants glued to your head, or butterfly hennins with veils spread like wings, perfect for drama, terrible for rain. Outside, the nobility, regular folk stuck to simple veils or circlets, less likely to be mistaken for a siege weapon. The clergy predictably weren't fans ranting about vanity and neck strain, but the hennin reigned supreme, proving bad ideas can look fabulous. Now the body. Forget athletic or curvy medieval beauty meant looking like you might faint if the wind picked up. The ideal was slim, soft and ethereal, like you lived on poetry and holy water. Strength was for peasants. Nobility aimed for a figure so delicate it seemed you'd snap under the weight of your own veil. Dresses helped with waistlines cinched just below the bust. Think early empire waist to elongate the torso and fake height. Tight lacing wasn't full-on corsets yet, but surcoats and kirtles hugged you enough to scream fragility. Too thin, though, and you looked like you were starving, which in plague times was a red flag. A hint of roundness in the face or hips said, "I'll survive winter and still look poetic." Beauty manuals didn't push workouts. The only lifting was your veil in a flirty glance before you swooned for effect. Broad shoulders or muscle, that was for labourers, not ladies. Men, meanwhile, could have broader frames, but still leaned noble thinkly knight, not burly blacksmith. The goal was a narrow waist, soft curves, and an air of spiritual exhaustion, like you'd just prayed for 3 hours straight. Diet tips: fennel for digestion, rose petals for breath and wine for that glow. Protein. Only if it had feathers. This was beauty as a performance, a way to say I'm above the grind. Next, we'll peer into those soulful eyes and tackle the medieval breath situation. Trust me, it's a saga. You're still here maybe with that fan humming like a medieval spinning wheel, ready to slip deeper into the strange gritty world of medieval beauty. We've tackled ghostly skin foreheads that could host a joust, golden hair, and hats that screamed status. Now let's zoom in on the eyes, those silent soulful weapons, and the less poetic challenge of keeping your breath from clearing a room. In the Middle Ages, your gaze could flirt or damn in your breath. Well, it was a daily battle against garlic and fate. So tuck in, imagine a flickering hearth, and let's dive into how medieval folks made their eyes sing and their mouths tolerable. Your eyes were your superpower, the medieval equivalent of a killer Instagram filter. The ideal was large, clear and soulful, like they held secrets to the universe, or at least a good psalm. Poets went wild, calling them luminous orbs or dewdrops of heaven, meaning they looked like you'd just finished crying over a 300-line poem about chastity. Light-coloured eyes, blue or grey, were big in Northern Europe, tied to innocence and purity, like you hadn't seen too many barnyard brawls. Down south, darker eyes worked too, especially if paired with a fat dowry. Enhancing them was tricky, no Sephora, just soot and hope. Some women dabbed charcoal powder around their lashes for that smoky look, risking red eyes and blurry vision. Most relied on tricks: stand near a candle to widen your pupils or gaze downward, like you're praying to avoid tripping over the cat. Slightly teary eyes were a hit, suggesting piety, or a heart full of feels. No artificial tears, just stare into smoke or endure a public scolding and you'd be glistening in no time. Eye contact was a tightrope too much, and you were bold, maybe even French. Too little, and you seemed shifty or possessed. The sweet spot was a quick glance from lowered lids, like you'd memorised the Bible but weren't bragging about it. Your eyes didn't just look pretty, they told the world you were virtuous, delicate, and probably not plotting a coup. Now breath, let's not sugarcoat it. Medieval dental hygiene was a dream deferred, and fresh breath was more aspiration than reality. A sweet-smelling mouth hinted at youth health, and a breakfast free of eels, but most folks were working with garlic mead and prayer. Still, women tried. They chewed parsley, fennel seeds, cloves, or cinnamon sticks like medieval gum minus the minty zing. Twigs doubled as chew sticks scrubbing your teeth while you fidgeted through bad poetry. For the elite apothecaries offered sage vinegar rinses or myrrh pastes, pricey, and used sparingly because opening your mouth too wide in public was a social faux pas. You'd swish spit and hope for the best. Bad breath wasn't a deal breaker, everyone had it. And surviving winter was a bigger worry, but noble women kept it subtle. Conversations happened at arm's length. Public kissing was rare, and if you had to talk close, you'd fan yourself with a scented pomander, a little herb-filled orb you waved like a tiny smell shield. It wasn't perfect, but it said I'm refined, and my breath's only mildly terrifying. These small acts of upkeep weren't just about beauty, they were about holding your own in a world where every glance and whiff told a story. Next, we'll tackle teeth, and why smiling was a high-stakes game. Cozy up maybe with that pillow just right as we keep trudging through the medieval beauty maze. We've covered eyes that could melt a knight's heart and breath that required herbal warfare. Now let's talk teeth, a topic medieval folks didn't shout about, and for good reason. In a world without dentists or fluoride, a smile was less a charm offensive and more a calculated risk. The goal was a demure closed-lip grin that said I'm noble, not I chewed bread for 30 years. So let's light a mental candle, settle into this gritty tale, and see how medieval smiles played hard to get. Teeth in the Middle Ages were, let's say, a mixed bag. By 30, most folks' mouths looked like a battlefield thanks to a diet heavy on starchy bread porridge and mead, with 0 toothbrushes or floss in sight. Sugar wasn't big yet, but starches broke down into tooth-tarnishing misery. Dental care think? Pliers and prayers with surgeons who made exorcists look gentle. Decay was rampant, and a full set of teeth was as rare as a unicorn sighting. So showing them off was like flashing a questionable report card. The ideal was white even teeth, a mark of youth luck or maybe divine favour, but you didn't go around grinning like a modern toothpaste ad. A big smile was too bold, too peasanty. Instead, noble women perfected the closed-lip smirk like they were pondering a sonnet or hiding a secret. It screamed refinement like I'm thrilled to be here, but my teeth are staying incognito. Still, people tried to keep their mouths presentable. Some used sage salt or ground coral powders to scrub their teeth rubbed on with a cloth. It was less sparkle and more slightly less grim, like brushing with sand and hoping for a miracle. Chew sticks' fibrous twigs did double duty as scrubbers and fidget toys while your suitor droned on about chivalry. These methods were mildly effective but mostly abrasive, and your teeth were more tolerated than flaunted. Art from the time backs this up. Saints, angels, even nobles in manuscripts rarely flash an open smile. They keep their lips sealed like they know the risks of showing the goods. For women, a healthy smile was admired quietly, a subtle nod to fortune. Men got a pass too, knights won hearts with bravery, not dental dazzle. No troubadour ever sang, her teeth gleamed like ivory because frankly ivory was a stretch. The focus stayed on eyes or hair, safer bets for poetic swooning. This wasn't just about aesthetics, it was survival. A bad smile didn't ruin you. Everyone's breath was a team effort, but a demure grin kept you classy. You'd flash it sparingly like a rare spice, saving the full reveal, for candle-lit moments when shadows hid the details. It was beauty under pressure, a reminder that even with crumbling molars you could still hold court. Next, we'll shift to the guys, how medieval men balanced noble looks with just enough swagger to avoid looking like they tried. You're still here, maybe curled up with a blanket that fan-purring like a distant medieval forge. We've waded through the wild world of pale skin, towering foreheads and smiles kept under lock and key. Now, let's shift to the fellas medieval men who had to look noble without looking like they spent too long in front of a polished bronze mirror. In the Middle Ages, a man's beauty wasn't about chiseled abs or a Jimbro flex. It was about striking a balance tough enough to swing a sword, refined enough to write a poem about it, and always, always above the peasant grind. So settle in by that imaginary hearth, and let's unpack how medieval men pulled off hot with a side of haughty. The ideal medieval man was tall, lean and broad-shouldered with an air of I could joust, but I'd rather not get my tunic dirty. Muscles were fine, knights needed some heft to lug armour, but too much bulk screamed manual labour, and nothing said not noble like looking like you hauled hay for a living. Think prince in a manuscript, not village blacksmith. A sharp jawline, high cheekbones and a straight nose were the trifecta, giving you that chosen by God vibe. Hair was a big deal, shoulder length, often curly and ideally golden, like you'd been kissed by the sun, but only metaphorically, because tanning was for serfs. Some men used curling irons, heated rods, or herbal rinses to make their locks gleam like a troubadour's fantasy. Beards were a toss-up, neatly trimmed for courtly types, clean-shaven for others, but always intentional, never. I got lost in the woods for a month's scruff. The goal was effortless nobility, like you were born looking like you owned half the county. Clothing was the real MVP here. Padded shoulders, cinched waists and fitted tunics sculpted the body into that ideal silhouette like medieval Spanx for the nightly set. Posture was everything a nobleman didn't slouch. He glided maybe with a hint of disdain for anyone who dared breathe his air. Colours mattered too, rich reds, purples or blues screamed wealth, while fur-trimmed hoods or feathered caps added swagger, without saying you tried too hard. Accessories like jewelled belts or pointy shoes, seriously, they could double as weapons seal the deal. The catch. You couldn't look like you cared. Trying too hard was for peasants, or worse, those overly fashionable French courtiers. A true nobleman's beauty was supposed to be God-given like his land or his falcon. You were just born better, and your perfectly styled fringe was proof. This wasn't just about looks, it was about power, signalling you were above the muck of daily life. Next, we'll sniff out how everyone, men and women, fought the great medieval stench with herbs and optimism. All right, you're cozied up, maybe picturing a candlelit castle hall, as we dive deeper into medieval beauty's weird and wonderful corners. We've covered men strutting their noble vibes, but now let's tackle something everyone in the Middle Ages dealt with, smelling less like a barnyard and more like a lord. Bathing was optional, plumbing was a pipe dream, and deodorant was centuries away, so scent management was less Chanel No. 5 and more herbs and prayers. Men and women alike turned hygiene into an art form, dodging the stink of sweat and stew with sheer ingenuity. So pull that blanket tighter, imagine a whiff of lavender, and let's explore how medieval folks kept their noses from revolting. Bathing wasn't a daily ritual, more like a special occasion depending on the century or how close you were to a plague. Hot summers, heavy woolen clothes, and no AC meant sweat was your constant companion like an overeager squire. The fixed layers of linen undergarments that soaked up the worst of it and could be washed sometimes. For the rest, you leaned on scent like a knight leans on his sword. Enter the pomander, a metal orb stuffed with cloves, rosemary or sage, worn on a chain or pinned to your cloak. It was your personal smell shield, like waving a tiny bouquet to say, "I'm not that medieval." Nobles went wild for perfumed gloves, handkerchiefs, even combs doused in floral waters, or vinegar infusions that smelled slightly better than desperation. Hair got the treatment to spritz it with rosewater, and suddenly you're not just a noble, you're a walking garden. Some overachievers stuffed flower petals in their shoes or bed linens, hoping to smell like they'd rolled through a meadow instead of a market. Dry bathing was the ultimate workaround when water was scarce. Or the church got grumpy about communal bathhouses. You'd wipe down with a cloth spritz some scented water and call it a day like a medieval wet wipe, but with more optimism. Herbs were the MVPs, sachets of lavender or mint tucked into your underlayers fought odour with fragrant grit. Bathhouses existed especially early on, but by the later Middle Ages the church's frown on nudity made them less popular. So you improvised, rub a little oil, sprinkle some powder of roses, and pray nobody got too close. This wasn't just about smelling nice, it was about status. A cleanish scent said you had the time, money and herbs to rise above the common stench. Even peasants tried with homemade sachets or a quick dunk in a stream, but nobles turned it into theatre. You didn't just avoid stink, you curated an aura like a walking cathedral of class. Next, we'll wrestle with the moral minefield of beauty, where looking too good could land you in hot water with God or the neighbours. You're still with me, maybe snuggled under a blanket that fan humming like a distant medieval chant. We've navigated ghostly skin, sky-high hats, and the eternal quest to smell less like a stable. Now let's step into the trickiest part of medieval beauty, the moral tightrope where looking too good could make you a saint or a sinner. In the Middle Ages, beauty wasn't just skin deep, it was a divine report card, a social weapon, and sometimes a one-way ticket to a sermon about hellfire. So settle by that imaginary fire picture, a judgmental priest lurking nearby, and let's dive into how beauty was a high-stakes game of virtue versus vanity. A pretty face, clear skins, symmetrical features, that ethereal pallor wasn't just a lucky draw, it was seen as God's thumbs up. If you were lovely, you were blessed, maybe even chosen like you had a direct line to heaven, or at least didn't steal sheep. Poets and painters swooned, calling beauty proof of a pure soul, as if your cheekbones were a theological argument. But here's the twist. Know you're hot, or worse, use it to charm a knight. and you're suddenly suspect. Vanity was a sin-pride sneaky cousin, and the church had a hawk eye for women fluttering lashes or flaunting a bit of hair. Too much makeup. You're tempting men to sin, and that's on you thanks to Eve's bad PR. Sermons warned that beauty could be a trap, a witch's glamour to lure good men into bad decisions. Sound dramatic. Sure, but this was an era where a bad harvest could get you burned at the stake, so a killer smile wasn't exactly safe either. It wasn't just women catching heat. Men who primped too much risk being called foppish, or heaven forbid French medieval code for trying too hard. But women bore the brunt. A noblewoman in lead powder and a hennin could be praised as angelic, or whispered about as demonic depending on the day's gossip. Some believed beauty was an illusion conjured by sorcery to mask a wicked heart. Plain folks weren't off the hook either. Ill features might mean God's punishment or moral failure, like your face was a cosmic Yelp review. The rules were maddening: be beautiful but don't try. Glow with virtue but not so much it looks like pride, and never ever outshine the Lord's wife unless you fancied a sudden convent vacation. Beauty was a paradox, a gift you had to wield like a sword you weren't supposed to touch. It shaped your status, your marriage prospects, and your survival in a world where every glance was judged. This wasn't just about looks, it was about navigating a minefield where God neighbours and your own mirror were all watching. Next we'll wrap this up and pivot to a new tale, one where silk and steel forge a legend. Alright, you're cosy maybe with that pillow just right as we close the curtain on the wild, weird world of medieval beauty. We've trudged through pale skin that screamed wealth, foreheads vast as cathedrals, and the daily grind of dodging stink and sin. It's been a ride full of lead powder, lofty hats, and smiles kept under wraps like state secrets. In the Middle Ages, beauty wasn't just a look. It was a battlefield where class morality and survival clashed. So let's linger by this mental hearth, wrap up this tale, and set the stage for something new. A story where discipline and silk weave a legend that echoes across empires. Medieval beauty was a paradox, a high-wire act between divine gift and devil's snare. Every dab of rouge, every plucked brow was a gamble. Look too good and you're vain, too plain and you're cursed. Noble women and some men slathered on toxic concoctions, teetered under towering hennins and prayed their breath didn't betray last night's stew to say I'm above the muck. It wasn't just vanity, it was grit, a stubborn drive to shine in a world of mud and plague. These folks didn't have TikTok filters or memory foam beds, but they had resilience, turning straw mattresses and arsenic creams into a kind of defiant art. Their story reminds us humans have always chased beauty not just to look good, but to feel like they mattered even when the mirror or the priest disagreed. It's a humbling thought. As you drift off, they laughed, loved and primped just like us, fleas and all. Now let's shift gears. Picture a sun-scorched plain far from castle halls where 10,000 men march as one, their silk robes glinting like a river of steel. These aren't knights or peasants, they're the Persian immortals, elite warriors of an empire that stretched from deserts to mountains. Their story isn't about beauty but power, not about faces but faceless unity. Where medieval nobles fought to stand out, these men were forged to blend in a living symbol of a king's unbreakable will. Their legend born under Cyrus the Great isn't just about swords, it's about a system so relentless it seemed eternal. So keep that fan humming, let your eyes grow heavy, and get ready to march with shadows who never falter, never fade, and never die. We'll pick up their tale next, rest easy till then. Alright, you're settled in maybe with that fan whispering like a desert breeze, ready to leave behind medieval mirrors for a sun-baked world of silk and steel. Picture the 6th century BCE, where Persia's stretching its wings, transforming from a scrappy kingdom into an empire that makes mountains bow. At its heart, the immortals, not just soldiers, but a living legend 10,000 strong, who seem to cheat death itself. So tuck that blanket closer, imagine the clink of spears, and let's dive into how these warriors were born and why their name still echoes like a war drum. If you're loving this, hit that like button, drop a comment with your time zone, and subscribe for more. Let's see who's marching with us tonight. Under Cyrus the Great, Persia wasn't just growing, it was rewriting what an empire could be. Conquering lands from Lydia's plains to Egypt's sands, Cyrus knew raw power wasn't enough. An empire needs a spine, a force that doesn't just fight, but means something. Enter the Immortals, a unit so elite they weren't just men, they were a message. Why Immortals? It's not because they dodged arrows or sipped from some mythic fountain. No, it was colder, cleverer. Their number was always 10,000. No more, no less. A man falls in battle, gets sick or breaks a leg. Another steps in seamless as a shadow. To enemies, it looked like they couldn't die, like killing one just summoned another. Greek historian Herodotus marvelled at this, calling them undying, and the name stuck not magic but logistics so tight it felt supernatural. This wasn't just bookkeeping. It was psychological warfare, a way to say you can't break us because we're never broken. These weren't random recruits scooped from villages. Immortals came from Persian nobility or loyal families handpicked for strength, discipline and devotion to the king. Training started young moulding boys into men who'd march through fire without blinking. They weren't just warriors, but symbols of Achaemenid values, order, obedience and a quiet, terrifying calm. Their role, guard the king, crush rebellions and stand behind thrones like a silent promise of power. From dusty battlefields to polished courts, they were Persia's heartbeat, dressed in silk but armed with steel. Cyrus didn't just create an army. He crafted a myth, one that made enemies tremble before a spear was raised. It's the kind of grit that makes you wonder, could you stand that tall? Knowing your name would vanish into the 10,000. Next we'll see how their look alone could freeze a foe's blood. You're still here cozy, maybe picturing a vast plain where dust swirls like a ghost army. That fan's hum. It's now the faint rustle of silk robes as 10,000 immortals march their steps eerily in sync. We've seen how Cyrus birthed this elite force, naming them immortals for their unbreakable numbers. Now let's zoom in on their look, because these guys didn't just fight. They looked like a nightmare dressed in finery. Their appearance wasn't an accident. It was a weapon crafted to make enemies falter before blades even clashed. So settle deeper into that pillow. Imagine a crimson sunset glinting off spears, and let's unpack how the Immortals turned style into terror. Forget the heavy bronze of Greek hoplites clanking like walking forges. The Immortals were a different breed, regal, almost otherworldly, like a wave of shadows draped in wealth. Their tunics and trousers dyed in rich reds and purples screamed nobility colours no peasant could touch. Underneath, scale armour of bronze or iron flexed like a second skinlight, enough to move fast, tough enough to take a hit. Wicker shields woven tight looked flimsy, but could catch arrows or blunt a sword's blow. Their headdress, a soft felt tiara sometimes pulled over the face, hid their eyes, making them less men and more myth. Picture 10, scum of them moving as one, no shouting, no boasting, just silence, broken only by the thud of boots and the clink of quivers. It was like facing a tide of death, faceless and unstoppable, each man armed with a short spear, bow and sword, ready to strike from afar or up close. This wasn't just fashion, it was a mind game. The Greeks loved their flashy armour, each man a hero craving glory. The Immortals, they erased the individual. Uniformity was their power. 10,000 men blending into one relentless force, overwhelming your senses like a storm you couldn't outrun. On the battlefield, drums pounded, dust rose, but their faces stayed blank, no rage or fear, just eerie calm. It wasn't about brute strength, but precision like a machine carved from silk and discipline. They'd loose arrows in perfect volleys, advance behind those wicker walls and close in with spears, all while looking like they'd just stepped out of a royal feast. To face them wasn't just to fight, it was to confront a concept, a living symbol of Persia's endless might. No wonder enemies whispered of gods or demons. This was beauty not of the face, but of fear itself. Next, we'll dive into the grueling training that forged these men into something more than mortal. You're still cozy maybe, with that fan humming like the faint clatter of a Persian camp at dawn. We've seen the Immortals rise under Cyrus, their silk robes, and eerie silence a weapon of awe. Now picture a dusty training ground where boys become shadows of an empire forged in sweat and steel. The Immortals weren't born, they were built through training so brutal it could make a Spartan wince. Their discipline wasn't just a skill, it was their blood, their breath, their everything. So tuck in, imagine the weight of a bow in your hands, and let's dive into how these men became the unbreaking spine of Persia's might. If you're vibing, hit that like, drop a comment with your time zone, and let's keep marching. To be an immortal, you didn't just sign up. You were chosen usually from Persian nobility or families so loyal they'd die before blinking. Training started young, when most kids were chasing goats, not glory. These boys, maybe 7 or 8, were plucked from their homes and sent to military camps tied to the royal court. Here the world was pain and precision. They learned archery on horseback, their small hands pulling bows until their fingers bled. They marched for hours under a sun that didn't care, learning to move as one no man out of step. Hunger drills taught them to endure empty bellies. Cold nights taught them to sleep on stone. Pain wasn't punishment, it was a teacher. A good immortal could take a lash and not flinch his eyes fixed on some distant king's command. Obedience wasn't negotiable. Hesitation was a death sentence, not for you, but for the sacred 10,000. Discipline ruled every moment like a drumbeat you couldn't escape. Wake before dawn, drill in silence, polish your spear until it gleamed like a star. Meals were simple, flatbread dates meat, maybe wine calculated to keep you lean, not pampered. No luxuries, no ego. If you sought glory, you were corrected sharply. The formation was holy. One man's pride could crack it. They lived communally, ate together, slept in rows, their lives a mirror of their battlefield unity. Even off duty, they were watched their loyalty to the king absolute. Families existed, but the empire owned you. A wife, kids, fine. But when the king called, you left without a backward glance. This wasn't just training, it was erasure, stripping away the self, until only the immortal remained a cog in a machine that never stopped. It's the kind of grit that makes you wonder, could you shed your name for a number? Next, we'll see how Darius turned these men into more than warriors, a symbol of an empire's endless reach. You're still with me, maybe picturing a royal court where silk rustles and eyes never waver, that fans hum now the murmur of a king's command. We've watched the immortals forged in fire, their training a relentless hymn to discipline. Now, under Darius the Great, they evolved not just soldiers, but a living banner of Persia's power woven into an empire that spans rivers and deserts. Darius didn't just use the immortals. He perfected them, making them a tool of fear, order, and awe. So settle deeper into that pillow, imagine a throne gleaming with gold, and let's explore how these 10,000 became the heartbeat of a king's dream. Keep the love coming, like, comment, subscribe, and tell me where you're tuned in from. When Darius seized the throne in 522 BCE amid blood and betrayal, the immortals were his anchor. No longer just Cyrus's guard, they became his fist, his eyes, his voice. Darius saw power not just in swords but in symbols, and the immortals were his masterpiece. He paraded them at festivals, stationed them in his glittering capital Persepolis, their spears a forest of silent threats. They weren't hidden, they were seen, a reminder to every noble, every subject that the king's will was eternal. But Darius also reshaped their fight. He made them the core of Persia's combined arms archers, cavalry chariots moving like a storm with the immortals as its eye. They trained harder, mastering bows for volleys that darkened the sky spears for close-quarter slaughter, and sieges that cracked city walls. Greek observers wrote of their terrifying precision, advancing behind wicker shields, arrows falling like rain, never breaking rank. It was less a battle than a ritual of dominance. Their darker role in forces. Darius's empire was vast Egypt to India, and rebellions flared like brush fires. The immortals were the quenchers sent to Babylon, Elam, Scythia, not just to fight, but to punish. Their arrival was a message the king sees, and his wrath is swift. At Persepolis, carvings show them in perfect lines, faces blank eternal in stone, propaganda chiselled into history. They weren't just warriors, they were fear itself, a promise that defiance was futile. Yet they were human, marching through dust, bleeding under silk, loyal to a king who demanded their souls. It's a chilling thought as you drift. Could you serve a machine that never pauses, knowing you're just one of 10,000? Next, we'll face the fire of Thermopylae, where their legend meets its fiercest test. You're still cozy maybe, with that fan humming like the distant clash of shields, ready to march into a narrow pass where legends are forged in blood. We've seen the immortals rise under Cyrus, their silken steel, perfected by Darius. Now it's 480 BCE, and the Persian Empire under Xerxes the Great crashes against Greece like a tidal wave. At Thermopylae, the immortals face their fiercest test not just against spears, but against a myth that dares to defy them. So tuck that blanket closer, picture a mountain pass choked with dust, and let's dive into how their reputation built on fear meets the stubborn fire of Spartan defiance. If you're feeling this hit, drop a comment with your time zone and subscribe. Let's see who's standing with us tonight. Xerxes' invasion of Greece was a spectacle, an army so vast it drank rivers dry with the immortals as his shining blade. Their name alone sent shivers through Greek city-states. 10,000 men who never died, who served a king like a god moving with a silence that screamed death. At Thermopylae, a narrow pass where mountains kiss the sea, King Leonidas and his few thousand Greeks, including 300 Spartans, dared to hold the line. For 2 days, wave after wave of Persians fell, their numbers useless in the choke point. On day 2, Xerxes unleashed the Immortals, expecting them to shatter the Greek wall. These were the elite after all, their wicker shields and short spears a promise of victory. But the pass was a traitor to their skill. Bows were near useless in such tight quarters. Their spears shorter than Greek Dora couldn't pierce the Spartan phalanx, a bristling hedge of bronze. For hours they clashed silk stained with blood, the Immortals' precision, meeting Spartan grit trained for exactly this meat grinder. Herodotus, with a Greek smirk, noted they fared no better than lesser troops. Losses piled up heavy and humiliating, yet defeat didn't break them, it cracked their myth. The Immortals' bled died, and for the first time their immortality flickered. Enemies saw not gods but men sweating, falling under Spartan spears. Still, they didn't crumble. They regrouped, adapted, and marched on their endurance, proving what their name always meant, not invincibility, but a machine that never stops. Thermopylae wasn't their end. It was a scar, a reminder that even legends bend under pressure. It's a gut check as you drift. Could you stand in a line that knows it might break yet holds anyway? Their story isn't over next. We'll uncover the cold machinery that kept their numbers eternal. You're still here, maybe with that pillow just right, the fans hum now, the scratch of a scribe's stylus in a Persian court. We've watched the Immortals bleed at Thermopylae, their myth dented but not destroyed. Now let's pull back the silk curtain to reveal what truly made them immortal. Not courage or magic, but a bureaucracy so relentless it could outlast a storm. The Achaemenid Empire ran on cold, efficient systems, and the Immortals were its masterpiece, a machine of 10,000 that never skipped a beat. So settle deeper, imagine a ledger glowing under lamplight, and let's explore how ink and order kept these warriors eternal. Keep the love coming, like comment with your city and subscribe for more. The Immortals' secret wasn't divine favour, it was administration, a hydra of logistics where every fallen head grew back. Their strength stayed exactly 10,000 always. A man dies in Egypt. His replacement's already marching from Susa. A soldier twists an ankle in Media, his understudies packing before dawn. This wasn't poetry, it was policy. The Empire kept a pool of trainees' noble sons, loyal youths drilled in camps ready to step into the line. No mourning, no pause, just a name swapped in a ledger. To enemies it looked like sorcery, kill one and another appears, same silk, same spear, same blank stare. This was terror by design, a system that said, you can't stop us because we never stop. Hazarapati's commanders of 1,000 oversaw it, all 10 of them, each ruling a slice of the 10,000 backed by scribes' quartermasters and medics who tracked every arrow, every ration, every man. The machinery was ruthless. A family turns disloyal. Their sons quietly replace, no scandal, no fuss. A trainee falters, he's gone another slotted in. Records were sacred, etched with care to ensure no gap, no weakness. This wasn't just about fighting, it was about projection, making the Empire feel like a god that never blinks. Unlike Greek heroes chasing personal glory, Immortals were faceless, their individuality erased for the collective. It's chilling, no statues for you, no songs, just the eternal 10,000. This system was their true strength, not spears, but the certainty that the line never breaks. As you ease towards sleep, think, could you vanish into a number knowing the machine would roll on? Next, we'll see how these warriors doubled as diplomats, their presence a silent threat in foreign courts. You're still nestled in maybe, with that fan purring like the murmur of a foreign court, ready to step from battlefields to polished halls where power speaks in whispers. We've seen the Immortals' blood at Thermopylae, their myth held together by relentless bureaucracy. Now picture them not as warriors, but as envoys, their silk robes a quiet threat in the Achaemenid Empire's game of awe and fear. These weren't just soldiers, they were Persia's living emblem sent to stun allies, and silence rebels without drawing a blade. So tuck that blanket tighter, imagine a throne room heavy with incense, and let's dive into how the Immortals wielded presence like a weapon. If you're vibing, hit that like comment with your time zone and subscribe. Let's see who's in the court tonight. In the Achaemenid worldview, power wasn't just conquest, it was spectacle. The Immortals, with their gilded spears and perfect ranks, were that spectacle deployed to foreign lands, not always to fight, but to be seen. Imagine a Greek or Babylonian city, its gates creaking open as 10 Immortals escort an ambassador. No rough leather or bloodied bronze here, just fine tunics laced with gold, soft felt tiaras masking their eyes moving in eerie sync. They didn't shout or threaten. They didn't need to. Their silence was louder than war cries, their unity a negotiation in itself. In satrapies, Persia's far-flung provinces, they stood watch, reminding governors who held the leash, a whisper of rebellion. A squad appeared at your door not to argue but to loom their presence, snuffing out dissent before it sparked. It was diplomacy by intimidation, a reminder that the king's eyes were everywhere. At home they were more than guards. During Nowruz festivals or coronations they lined Persepolis' halls, ceremonial, yet lethal, their spears glinting like promises. Behind the pomp they were the king's shadow, watching courtiers sniffing out treason, enforcing loyalty with a glance. Some historians call them an intelligence network, their discipline making them as trusted to spot lies as to end lives. They weren't just muscle. They were myth-blending warrior and ornament in a way no Greek hero could match. War was one tool, but their true genius was holding an empire together with awe, not just swords. It's a haunting thought as you drift. Could you stand so still, knowing your silence speaks louder than screams? Next we'll watch their legend fade as empires age and even immortals falter. You're still cozy, maybe with that pillow just right. The fans hum now a fading echo of an empire's glory. We've marched with the immortals through courts and battles, their silk a banner of fear. But even legends rust, and by the Achaemenid Empire's twilight, the immortals' shine began to dim. Not with a crash, but a slow creep of decay, as kings grew soft and systems frayed. Yet their shadow stretches long, outliving spears to shape armies and myths for centuries. So settle deeper, picture a crumbling palace, and let's trace their fall and the echo they left behind. Keep the love coming, like comment with your city subscribe, and let's close this saga together. Under later kings, Artaxerxes, Darius III, the immortals still marched, still gleamed, but the fire was fading. Kings traded battlefields for courtly luxury, more obsessed with wine than war. The immortals, once honed to perfection, became ornaments, their ranks tainted by politics. Noble families pushed unworthy sons into the sacred 10,000 trading discipline for favours. Standards slipped. The machine stuttered. By 334 BCE, when Alexander the Great stormed Persia, the cracks were fatal. At Gaugamela in 361 BCE, the immortals fought bravely guarding Darius III's centre, but Alexander's Macedonian phalanx, tight, ruthless, outflanked and overwhelmed them. The myth shattered. No replacements came. The system that kept them eternal had crumbled. When Alexander took Persepolis, the immortals were gone, their line broken, the palace a hollow shell. But myths don't die clean. Alexander borrowed their style, weaving Persian discipline into his army. Later, the Sasanian Empire birthed a new immortals, 10,000 strong, echoing the old fear. Roman scholars, Byzantine scribes, even Arab historians wrote of the 10,000, their spears a silver forest in memory. Napoleon studied their structure, awed by their relentless order. Modern tales twist them into demons or assassins, but the truth is rawer. They were men made eternal not by magic, but by a system that erased their names for the empires. Their legacy isn't victory, it's the idea of power that doesn't flinch, a machine of silk and steel that haunts generals and storytellers alike. As you ease towards sleep, ponder this: what's left when your name fades but your shadow endures. Next, we'll shift to women who carved their own legends, blades in hand. You're still here cozy maybe, with that fan humming like the wind across a vast steppe. We've left the immortals silk and steel behind, their legend fading into Persepolis' dust. Now picture a wilder world, where hoofs thunder and arrows sing, where women don't wait behind tents, but ride bow in hand, as fierce as any man. Welcome to the Scythians, nomadic warriors of the Eurasian plains, feared from the Black Sea to the Altai mountains. Their women weren't just warriors, they were legends etched in graves and Greek tales. So tuck that blanket closer, imagine a sky heavy with stars, and let's gallop into the lives of these deadly riders. If you're loving this, hit that like comment with your time zone and subscribe. Let's see who's riding with us tonight. In the 1st century BCE, the Scythians roamed the steppes, a people bound to horses and horizon, where survival meant mobility and grit. Unlike the Greeks or Persians with their rigid roles, Scythian women didn't stay home weaving or praying. They saddled up bows slung across their backs and went to war. This wasn't rare, it was culture. Greek historian Herodotus, half shocked, half awed, wrote of tribes where women wouldn't marry until they'd killed an enemy in battle. Exaggeration, maybe, but archaeology doesn't lie. Burial mounds called kurgans dot Ukraine, Kazakhstan and Russia, holding women's skeletons with bows, swords and battle scars. One grave revealed a young woman, an arrowhead in her spine, her armour gleaming, her weapons worn from use, not props but tools of death. These women rode as hard as men, their leather trousers and tattoos blurring gender on the battlefield, a storm of arrows at full gallop. Life on the steppe demanded everyone fight. Girls learned archery alongside boys, their small hands drawing bows before they could walk steady. They hunted, raided, defended the tribe equals in the saddle, where a warrior's worth was measured in kills, not skirts. Yet off the horse rolls stiffened, women wove cooked, kept rituals, their deadly hands turning to hearth and home. This wasn't contradiction, it was balance, a culture where a woman could slay by day and sing by firelight. Greek myths of Amazons likely sprang from these riders, their truth fiercer than fiction. They clashed with Persians, rattled Greeks, and made Macedonians pause. As you drift, picture this, a woman, bow, taut hair, whipping in the wind, free in a way no city could cage. Could you match her aim, her fire? Next, we'll leap to a West African kingdom where women warriors carved fear into history's heart. You're still cozied up, maybe, with that pillow just right, the fans hum now, the pulse of a West African drum. We've galloped with Scythian women, their arrows slicing the steppes' silence. Now, fast forward to the 18th and 19th centuries, to the small but fierce kingdom of Dahomey modern-day Benin, where women didn't just fight, they became the king's deadliest blade. Known as the Agoji, or Dahomey Amazons, to awestruck French colonizers, these warriors turned fear into legend, their blades flashing in a world that underestimated them. So settle deeper. Picture a jungle alive with war cries, and let's dive into their unyielding strength. Keep the vibes going, like comment with your city, and subscribe for more. The Agoji weren't born from myth, they were forged in fire. By the 1700s they'd evolved from palace attendants or elephant hunters into the king's elite guard, a standing army of women who didn't just protect but conquered. Recruited as girls, chosen for strength or spirit, they were torn from families and plunged into training that broke the weak. Picture thorn-filled obstacle courses sparring with real machetes, oaths of celibacy sworn to the king. Discipline was total, their lives, a vow to serve, no questions, no retreat. They wore braided sashes, carried muskets, clubs and blades, but their real weapon was fearlessness. A French officer shaken wrote of an Agoji, who ripped a man's throat open, wiped her blade and kept moving calm as a breeze deadly as a storm. These weren't ceremonial soldiers. They led raids, ambushed enemies and held the line in open battle. In the 1890s, during the Franco-Dahomean Wars, the Agoji faced French colonial troops outgunned and outnumbered. Yet they struck at night, slipped through shadows, fought street by street to shield their kingdom. Their bravery forced French commanders to rethink tactics, stunned by women who laughed at bullets. Beyond the battlefield, they shaped Dahomey's soul, advising kings, performing rituals, wielding influence in a patriarchal world. Their defeat didn't erase them. Their legacy inspired tales like the Dora Milaje in Black Panther, though truth outshines fiction. As you ease towards sleep, imagine their war chants, their blades gleaming under moonlight. Could you stand so bold knowing the world doubts your place? Next we'll meet a samurai woman whose sword carved her name into Japan's heart. You'll still hear cozy maybe with that fan humming like the rustle of a samurai's armour. We've ridden with Scythian archers and trembled at Dahomey's Agoji women who carved their names into history's edge. Now picture late 12th century Japan where civil war tears the land apart and one woman rides through blood and legend with a blade as sharp as her will. Tomo Gozen's samurai warrior isn't a myth or a sidekick, she's a commander feared for her skill and unyielding heart. So tuck that blanket closer, imagine a battlefield thick with mist, and let's dive into her story where beauty and lethality dance as one. If you're feeling this hit, that like comment with your time zone and subscribe. Let's see who's wielding a sword with us tonight. In the Genpei War, where the Minamoto and Taira clans battled for Japan's soul, Tomoe Gozen served Minamoto no Yoshinaka, a warlord, and perhaps her lover. The Heike Monogatari, a war epic blending fact and poetry, paints her as stunning white skin, long hair, a face to launch 1,000 ships. But then it drops the real fire. She was an archer, who could outshoot any man, a swordswoman worth 1,000 warriors. Picture her on horseback, Naginata, flashing arrows flying with deadly grace. She didn't trail behind Yoshinaka. She led troops cutting through enemies like a storm through bamboo. At the Battle of Awazu in 1184, with rival Minamoto forces closing in, Yoshinaka ordered a last stand. Tomoe could have fled, but she chose the fight. In one blazing moment, she charged an enemy horseman, wrestled him to the ground, and beheaded him with a flick of her blade, then rode back into the chaos calm as a winter dawn. That act, whether true or embellished, burns bright in Japan's memory. Tomoe's world was rigid samurai honor patriarchal rules, but she sliced through it. Trained in sword and bow, she was no delicate court lady. Her hands were calloused, her eyes sharp with purpose. After Awazu, her fate blurs. Captured and married off a nun in silence, or vanished a ghost in the mists, whatever her end. Tomoe's legacy lives in theatre folklore and Japan's heart. A woman who fought not just for her lord, but for her right to be. As you drift, imagine her silhouette against a blood-red sky blade high. Could you stand so fierce in a world that says you shouldn't? Next we'll meet a Celtic queen whose fury nearly broke Rome's iron grip. You're still cosy maybe with that pillow. Just right. The fans hum now the roar of a Celtic war chariot. We've followed Tomoe Gozen's blade through Japan's chaos, but now leap to 1st century Britannia, where Rome's empire clamps tight until one woman's vengeance sets it ablaze. Boudica, queen of the Iceni, isn't a quiet ruler. She's a flame-haired fury leading a revolt that shakes Rome to its core. Her story is raw, relentless, a scream against injustice. So settle deeper, picture a land of mist and defiance, and let's charge into her legend. Keep the love coming, like comment with your city and subscribe for more. In 60 or 61 CE, Boudica was wife to Prasutagus Iceni king, and Roman puppet allowed to rule if he played nice. When he died, Rome spat on his will, seizing his lands. Worse, they flogged Boudica publicly, and Tacitus raped her daughters, a calculated humiliation to crush the Iceni spirit. Instead, it lit a wildfire. Boudica, tall, fierce, her red hair streaming like a battle flag, united tribes, and launched a rebellion that burned through Roman Britannia. From a chariot spear in hand, gold torque gleaming, she led her army not as a figurehead, but as priestess and general. Her voice a call to slaughter. They razed Camulodunum, modern Colchester, then Londinium, London, leaving ash and 70,000 dead Romans and collaborators alike. Her fury wasn't just war, it was erasure, a howl against Rome's arrogance. Rome regrouped under Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, luring Boudica into a pitched battle. Outnumbered, Roman discipline crushed her undisciplined horde. Facing capture, Boudica took poison, denying Rome their prize. Her revolt failed, but her shadow grew. Roman historians, even while calling her barbarian, couldn't hide their awe at her courage. For later Britons, she became a symbol of resistance, her name a rally cry against tyranny. As you ease towards sleep, picture her chariot wheels thundering hair like fire. Could you rise from such pain, turning grief into a blade? Next, we'll meet a Mongol princess who wrestled men and empires into submission. You're still cozy, maybe, with that fan humming like the wind across a Mongol steppe, ready to leave Boudica's fiery revolt behind. Now picture the 13th century, where the Mongol Empire's hooves shake the earth, and one woman stands tall, not with a sword, but with strength that humbles warriors. Kutlug, Turkan, great-great-granddaughter of Genghis Khan, isn't just a princess. She's a wrestler, a commander, and a legend who turns men's pride into dust. So tuck that blanket closer, imagine a yurt under endless stars, and let's dive into her story of raw power and defiance. If you're vibing, hit that like comment with your time zone and subscribe. Let's see who's grappling with us tonight. Born around 1260, Ce Kutlug was daughter to Kaidu Khan, a fierce rival to Kublai Khan in the Mongol Empire's fractured heart. Raised like a prince, she trained in archery, horse riding, and battlefield tactics, but her true arena was wrestling, a Mongol obsession, where strength was honour. Persian historian Rashid al-Din writes she vowed to marry only a man who could pin her. Spoiler, none did. Dozens of suitors, princes, warriors stepped up, betting horses, gold, even herds. Each walked away, bruised their egos flatter than the steppe. Kutlug amassed 10,000 horses, becoming not just a champion, but one of the richest women in the empire. Picture her broad-shouldered eyes glinting, tossing men like sacks of grain, her laugh echoing as crowds roared. It wasn't just sport, it was power, a woman claiming space in a world of Khans. But Kutlug wasn't just a showman. She fought beside Kaidu, leading troops against rival Mongols and Chinese forces. her horse thundering, her bow singing. Kaidu trusted her above all, even considering her as heir a move that made nobles whisper unnatural. In the end, he chose a man bowing to tradition, but Kutlug's